hearing from Jen Deerenwater from jendeerenwater.com, and I'm Kathy Martilli from theintimacydojo.com. And Jen, we're talking right now because you're going to be presenting at the Woodhull Sexual Freedom Summit on reproductive justice in the front lines, showing up for Indigenous people. And I love that you're talking about it. I knew there were issues, but I never, until I'd heard from some other people like you that are standing up and saying, hey, this is an issue, I didn't understand how complex it was.
For me, as a Native person who is Indigenous to Turtle Island, which Turtle Island is what we refer to as North America, I feel like I have to constantly remind people, not just of the issues that we face, but that we still exist.
Yeah.
I recently saw, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it was somewhere in the 60th percentile of Americans don't believe natives still exist. They think we're all dead.
Oh, wow.
So for me, talking about reproductive justice and Indigenous people is important on so many levels. It touches with, environmental issues and issues of environmental racism. It's ableism that we deal with within our communities, the lack of health care, and it's how genocide has played out for us in so many ways. It's not just the literal murder of our people, it's also the theft of our land, our language, our ceremonies, all of our ways, and that becomes a reproductive justice issue. If we can't practice our own religions, how do we heal from colonization? How do we heal from the sexual assault and the forced and coerced use of sterilization on our Indigenous women and female-bodied people? It's a queer issue as well, because before the white invasion, a lot of our nations had multiple genders. We didn't do the gender binary. My people didn't anyway.
Yeah.
So that's a very long-winded answer to why you should care about Indigenous people and reproductive justice.
Well, thank you so much. What are one of the big things that you want people to be aware of? I know that you went through kind of a list, but what's can you draw out a little more, go a little deeper in one of the topic areas?
I guess, this is something that I want people to take away from any of the work I do, whether it's, writing, organizing, giving presentations like this, is that America as a nation does not have the right to exist upon this land. And the white man's laws, the white man's policies were not made with us in mind. It gets very frustrating when I write about and post about issues of, the violation of free speech and things of that nature. And a lot of non-natives don't get that, the white man's laws aren't really applicable to us in a lot of ways. We are our own distinct Indigenous nations. We're not just a race of people. We are made up of hundreds of sovereign nations, and we have our own laws, our own courts, our own ways, and what the white man does isn't applicable to us in some ways. Yes, we're forced to deal with colonization, but I don't look to the Bill of Rights to protect me and my people. I definitely don't look to the Declaration of Independence that literally called us merciless savages. So I think the one thing I want non-natives to walk away with is that, we are our own people, we have our own nations, and America doesn't have the right to exist upon this land. And because of that existence, it has impacted every single aspect of our life.
Oh, I can't even begin to, having not walked those shoes, in your shoes, I can't begin to imagine having your whole culture erased in a lot of ways. And just from a purely pragmatic, for someone that considers themselves American, and we should be here, I don't think I'm not saying that's my belief. I'm saying that from that pragmatic point of view, there's so much wisdom in the cultures that even a lot of the accountability process and the social justice process that we're learning from comes from Indigenous people and how they dealt with things in their tribes. There's so much wisdom there that has been pushed to the side or erased or ignored, and never mind the people that are suffering because they're not seen. Not being seen and heard is so painful to a human being. What are some of so reproductive justice is the top of your title. What are some of the issues people run into around reproductive justice as an Indigenous person?
Well, I think that's it's heavily dependent upon, I feel like, which nation you are,
Yeah.
because once all of our nations have, we have similarities, but we also have very different ways of being and doing, and we've also had different interactions with the colonizer. Um, so I think that that's important to remember, is that our experiences are not monolithic. We're not a monolithic people. But some of the things that I really talk about in this presentation, I talk quite a bit about environmental racism and the colonization of our lands. How the wood, the mineral oils, like the fish, all of the things that white people have had for hundreds of years came at our expense. And so a lot of that is very heavily tied with environmental racism, the pipeline issues. But also I talk about how that racism brings more sexual violence towards our people. It brings the man camps, which, for those who aren't familiar, a man camp is just like a makeshift setup by a pipeline or mining company. They throw a bunch of trailers together, and these almost entirely non-native, mostly white men, set up shop in these trailers, and then they go on the reservation and rape our men, they murder us, they kidnap us, traffic us, and they know that they do it because Supreme Court case law has said that we natives don't have the right to try non-natives to commit violent acts or any crime for that matter, on our land.
Yet if I traveled to Switzerland and I committed a crime, they have every right to try me.
Right. Yeah, but we don't, and so because of that, it gets so complex. It's the pipeline companies, it's the people, the men who just are rapists and know they can get away with it on the res. I also talk about the issues of police brutality and other brutalities through the systems, like the boarding school era. Our children have been taken from us for generations, and once upon a time they were placed in boarding schools, and now our kids are being taken from us and put in foster care and juvenile detention centers. So I talk some about that in this presentation. I talk about the forced and coerced use of sterilization and birth control on our women. Many of us, the only health care access we have is Indian Health Services, which is it's funded by the federal government, and it doesn't even come close to meeting our needs. It's like we have when people talk about how natives have free health care and all of these things as if it's some great perk, it's like, well, one, those were negotiated in treaties, and the U.S. government doesn't get to just willy-nilly break treaties with other nations, so they don't have the right to do that to us.
Yeah, though they have so many times. Well, here's this awful piece of land. Oh, there's gold there. Please move. We're going to give you an even worse piece of land while we take the resources.
Right. Yeah. So it was tough when I first started putting this presentation together, because it was like, my God, there's so many interlocking aspects of the lack of reproductive justice for Native people, and I don't want to overload people. I want people to learn and to walk away also with ideas of how to be engaged. But there's just so much to it. It's so complex,
Absolutely. I'm so, thank you for all your labor and energy put into this, because I think there's so much, I know I have so much to learn on this topic, and I love that you're teaching and helping people be aware. And why is Woodhull a good place for you to share this? Why are you?
Well, I think that anywhere I have the opportunity to help teach and give voice to any of my communities, Native or otherwise, is a space I want to be. And I feel like with Woodhull, there are going to be people coming in that the majority of them don't know much about Native people. They don't know much about these issues for us. But I think that it's going to be a place where the people are open to learning, and not just learning, but also taking that education, that knowledge, and moving forward with it to do good with it. And to me, reproductive justice, it's about saving my people. It's about our lives and going from just also surviving to thriving. But because of all of the violence that we've had inflicted upon us, a lot of us are also not in touch with our own sexuality. We're afraid of it, or we've completely absorbed all of the horrible messages around sex and sexuality from the colonizer. And so I feel like that's another really important aspect to like being at Woodhull, is because I want all of us natives to find our way to that, like that sexual freedom and that pleasure and all of those wonderful great things.
Yeah, oh, I love that. And I find Woodhull a really great place because we're all wanting to, like, we all have a very common mission, even if we have different groups we're supporting or different doorways we're going through. There's a lot of passion, and it really, I find it very recharging. This battle can be so, like, there's nights I come home and I'm just like, there's not a lot left. Yeah. And then just being around other people, like, oh, I'm not alone, and I can learn from these people. That's a really good tip. I didn't think about that one. I go every year because I love that. I love that energy. Yeah. So if someone wanted to learn more about reproductive justice and the topics you're talking about, what's a good place for them to go? Like, where could they find, besides, I mean, they should definitely go to your talk at Woodhull. But where else can they look to get more information on this? Because it's if we heard about this happening in another country, we would be up in arms. There'd be people protesting and raising money and donations, and yet this happens in our country, and most of us don't even know about it. Like, where can we go to get more information?
Well, there's a few organizations that I really like. They may not necessarily use the term reproductive justice, but the work they are doing is part of reproductive justice. So IEN, the Indigenous Environmental Network, they're really great. They do a lot of work around treaties, sovereignty, ending environmental racism, things of that nature. I also really love, it's the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. Mm-hmm. They are great. They do a lot of work around sexual assault, domestic violence, trafficking, healthcare issues. And then the Two-Spirit Nation, that's another that was started by Candy Brings Plenty at Standing Rock. One of our relatives, Courage, started the Two-Spirit Camp, and then Candy Brings Plenty created the Two-Spirit Nation, which is an organization. So I think that's another really great one too, because it reminds everybody that, you know, we have all these multiple genders and identities and things that we're working to decolonize. And another one that I really love is I have acronyms in my mind, so I always try to botch it when I say the names. It's the Native Youth Sexual Health Network. That's what it is. And they're based in Canada, and they do a lot of really great work too. So there's so many places that people could go to learn and engage, but those are some of my favorite organizations.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your generosity and all you've shared. And I can't wait to see your talk at Woodhull in a couple months.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, I'm excited.
If you're watching this and you have questions or any ideas that you want to share, please leave them below and we'll try to get them answered for you.